Hello and welcome. My name is Rianna. I'm a teacher candidate from the University of British Columbia and a youth ambassador for the Pacific Canada Heritage Centre. I'm here to share with you today my family history and their migration experience as Indo-Fijian Canadians. I hope you enjoy. Before I begin my story, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm currently located on the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territories of the Hunkaminam speaking peoples. I am grateful to be a guest on this land, and I would like to share my appreciation for the Indigenous communities that have been stewards of this land long before us. My story begins unlike many others. A few years ago, I found myself really struggling to find a sense of belonging here in Canada, despite it being my place of birth. As a member of the South Asian diaspora, I never found a label that seemed to best fit my identity. This longing for a label came from wanting to be a part of something, to be a part of a community. Trying to identify with being Canadian was often rejected and questioned because I didn't fit the picture of what a white Canadian looked like in a settler society. If I tried to identify with being Canadian, I was also pushed to answer a follow-up question of, okay, but where are you really from? But having to explain that my ancestors were from India, my parents were born in Fiji, and that I was born in Canada felt pointless if people did not understand the histories of these nations. So by now you're probably wondering, how or why did people from India end up in places like Fiji? The short answer to that is British colonization, but to find out the longer answer, you better keep listening. The book Coolie Woman by Gayatri Bahadur was imperative to my understanding of my family history. I learned about the indentured labor system, where Indian men and women were misled into coming to British overseas territories, like Fiji, with a false promise of fortune and a safe return home. This slave-like system existed in India from 1834 to 1917. Men and women were exploited, degraded, and abused by those in power. Female indentured workers, especially, were mistreated given beliefs around gender, and many lost their lives during this time. When I first saw the pictures of the book, I felt like I could see a reflection of myself in these images for the first time, which I rarely got to see growing up. When I grew up, people that looked like me were hardly represented in schools, politics, TV shows, and in books. So seeing all this made me really intrigued and excited to learn more. My family traces their ancestry to one of the groups of indentured laborers who came from India to Fiji sometime in or around 1879. These groups of people were known as the Girmithias, and they worked on the sugarcane plantations. My family stayed in Fiji for a few generations. Here you can see the images of both my maternal and paternal grandparents in Fiji. Due to the impacts of colonization, which displaced the indigenous population of Fiji, the Indian community became the predominant wealth holders, which caused the two main communities to have growing tensions and stay segregated from one another. Take a look at some of the photos from Fiji when my dad was a child. In 1970, Fiji declared its independence from the British after 96 years of ruling. They celebrated this day on October 10, 1970. Yet you can still see a familiar face. Yep, that's Prince Charles. For my family, there's also another familiar face. On the very right is one of my aunts, Mirdula, who is one of the dancers that took part in the celebrations of this day. Although my mother and father had not yet met, both of my families moved to Canada around the 70s. Now at this time, Pierre Elliott Trudeau was the Prime Minister, and he was encouraging immigrants to come into Canada for new opportunities. This is when multiculturalism really took off, but it wasn't the mosaic analogy that we know today. It was one of a melting pot, where immigrants were expected to assimilate to Canadian values and beliefs. While I can't speak on behalf of all immigrants at this time, I know that my grandparents and parents faced great challenges and marginalization of society because of racism. For my family, in order to feel accepted in this kind of society, meant disassociating from many aspects of their identity, including their native language. In the next clip, my mom explains her experience with languages.
I mostly speak English. I also speak a Fijian dialect of Hindi. Our Hindi is very broken down. It's very slang, broken down Hindi of the Shuddh Hindi that officially is spoken in India. I'd greet a immediate close family member by saying Kaise, which means hi and hello, how are you? But if I was speaking to somebody like a priest, I would say Namaste. It's a more official, more polite way of speaking.
My family has experienced systemic racism, internalized racism, colorism, and colorblind racism, where people dismissed race and color altogether. As you can see in these photos, my parents took on a very westernized lifestyle. People like my mother adapted to Western beauty standards where they felt that being fair and lovely was the only way to look desirable. In the next clip, you can hear my mom's experience trying to find makeup back in the day.
It was very difficult 20, 30 years ago. It was really hard to match makeup for my skin color. So what I ended up doing is mixing two different colors, a lighter and a darker color, to kind of make do with what I could. And as years have gone by, there's a lot more makeup artists, black women, Indian women, that have come out with beautiful colors that match my tones much better. I have tried Stellar Beauty, and Fenty Beauty is my favorite, my go-to.
People like my father also had to work so much harder for success and recognition in his talents and skills. As you can see in his basketball team photos, I think it's important to take note that my father was clearly one, if not the only, visible minority on the team. Despite this, my dad was still a star basketball player. He played for Richmond High's Colts team, and together they won the BC championship in 1985. In the next clip, my dad's going to share his famous nickname on the team.
My famous nickname was Chocolate Thunder. I was named that because I was the only brown person on the team.
Despite there being racial setbacks, me and my family finally started to embrace our identity and our proud label of being Indo-Fijian Canadians. Although we are not indigenous to Fiji, we still hold a lot of Fijian pride, which you will see coming up.
I describe myself as an Indo-Fijian Canadian. I was born in Fiji Islands and migrated to Canada when I was 5 years old and became a Canadian citizen.
Toso Viti, Toso! That means go Fiji, go!
Although times are changing, the effects of racism still get trickled into my own life on a day-to-day basis. In high school, I was known as sometimes the exotic-looking one, which is not a compliment in my books, considering the definition of exotic. I wasn't always proud of the color of my skin, but now I'm working hard to unlearn racism and be a voice for marginalized folks and the issues that they face. Now I'm pursuing a career in teaching in hopes of creating change for the way BIPOC community members are reflected and included in the education system. My goal is to create safer environments for students to learn in, no matter their race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, or culture. Something that my grandparents used to say to me that will stay with me forever is that people can take away a lot from you, material goods, your time, and your money, but they can never take away your education. Learning about my family history has been a driving force for wanting to see social change because I wish they could have been alive to see a different and more inclusive kind of world. I can only imagine that if my ancestors could be here today, we would be sipping chai talking about the importance of sharing these stories. Thank you for listening.